Have you ever felt like you were watching life happen from the outside, as if you were an observer in a play where everyone else follows a script you can no longer accept? That feeling that the rules governing the society around you seem increasingly absurd, as if you'd awakened from a collective dream and could now see reality with a disturbing clarity? If you've experienced this, you may have started questioning not just social norms, but the entire invisible architecture that shapes our behavior, desires, and even our most intimate dreams. Perhaps you are among the rare individuals who have begun to perceive the invisible strings that move the human puppet, and more importantly, maybe you've begun to cut some of those strings. The truth is, most of humanity lives within systems of control so sophisticated that their existence often goes unnoticed. We are like fish that can't see the water they swim in, accepting as natural the structures that were deliberately built to keep us in specific states of behavior and awareness. These systems are not necessarily malicious in origin. Many emerged as practical solutions to real problems of human social organization, but over millennia, they have evolved into golden cages that drastically limit our potential for genuine growth and autonomy. What makes these systems particularly effective is that they don't operate through brute force or obvious coercion, but through the subtle manipulation of our deepest instincts, primal fears, and desires for belonging and safety. Over the last 10,000 years, since our species developed agriculture and began forming the first complex civilizations, we've been gradually domesticated by social structures that promised security in exchange for freedom, predictability in exchange for authenticity, and belonging in exchange for individuality. This domestication was not a conscious or planned process, but a cultural evolution that favored societies best able to keep their members obedient, productive, and predictable. Over the centuries, we developed religious institutions that taught us to seek approval from divine authorities, educational systems that trained us to follow instructions without question, economic structures that made us dependent on jobs and salaries to survive, and social networks that conditioned us to constantly seek external validation. Each of these institutions, on their own, might seem beneficial or even necessary, but together they form a set of invisible chains that keep most of humanity in a state of perpetual dependence. The first sign that someone has begun to outsmart this system is a fundamental shift in their relationship with work and money. Most people accept as natural the idea that they must trade most of their waking hours for money, working in jobs they often find meaningless or even harmful, simply because they have bills to pay and a lifestyle to maintain that society told them was necessary. They organize their entire lives around schedules imposed by others, sacrifice time with family and friends to meet deadlines set by bosses, and indefinitely postpone their dreams and passions in the name of practicality and responsibility. Those who've broken free see this as one of the most sophisticated traps ever created by civilization. They begin to question not just what kind of work they do, but the very premise that time must be exchanged for money. They develop multiple sources of income, seek ways to automate or optimize their earnings, and most importantly, begin to value time and freedom above status and consumption. This isn't laziness or irresponsibility, it's a deep understanding that time is the scarcest resource we have, and trading it for money without question is one of the most subtle forms of modern slavery. The second sign appears in how these individuals handle opinions and social validation. Most human beings are deeply dependent on others' approval, shaping their opinions, lifestyle, and even personality according to what they believe will be accepted and admired by their social group. They avoid expressing controversial thoughts, follow trends without question, and feel genuine anxiety when they realize their views differ from the mainstream consensus. This need for approval is systematically exploited by advertisers, politicians, and influencers who know exactly how to manipulate our ancestral fear of rejection and social exclusion. Those who've broken free develop an emotional independence that allows them to form opinions based on their own analysis and experience, even when those views are unpopular or misunderstood. They don't constantly seek external validation for their choices and feel no need to justify their way of life to people who don't understand their circumstances or values. This independence doesn't make them arrogant or insensitive, but rather more authentic and less manipulable. They've learned that approval is an infinite resource that can never truly be earned because someone will always disagree or judge, and seeking it is a never-ending race that only distracts from the real work of self-knowledge and personal growth. The third sign reveals itself in their relationship with consumption and material status. Modern society was built on the premise that happiness and success can be measured by accumulating objects, experiences, and status symbols. From birth, we're bombarded with messages telling us we need specific products to be happy, attractive, safe, or respected. This programming runs so deep that many people organize their entire financial life around acquiring things they don't actually need, racking up debt and working jobs they hate just to afford expensive cars, branded clothes, the latest gadgets, or homes larger than necessary. Those who've broken free recognize this as a carefully constructed trap that keeps people stuck in cycles of work and consumption that mostly benefit corporations and financial institutions. They develop a much more conscious relationship with money and possessions, buying only what truly enhances their quality of life or aligns with their core values. This doesn't mean living in poverty or denying all material pleasures, but rather distinguishing between real needs and desires artificially created by advertising and social pressure. This mindset shift often frees them from surprising amounts of financial stress and allows them to focus their energy and resources on experiences and relationships that truly matter. The fourth sign appears in how they process information and form beliefs. Most people consume information passively, accepting as truth whatever is repeated often enough by the media outlets they've chosen to follow. They tend to seek out sources that confirm their pre-existing beliefs and avoid information that might challenge their worldview, creating echo chambers that reinforce their biases and cognitive limitations. This intellectual passivity is deliberately cultivated by educational systems that reward memorization and obedience over critical thinking, and by a media industry that simplifies and polarizes complex issues to keep audiences engaged. Those who've broken free have developed a healthy skepticism toward all sources of information, even those that confirm their own views. They actively seek out divergent perspectives, question the motives behind the information they receive, and maintain a genuine curiosity about topics they don't fully understand. They haven't become cynical or paranoid, but intellectually independent, capable of holding the tension of not knowing and changing their mind when presented with compelling evidence. This intellectual independence protects them from political and commercial manipulation and helps them navigate an increasingly complex world with greater discernment and wisdom. The fifth sign is reflected in the quality and nature of their personal relationships. Modern society promotes forms of relationships that are often shallow, competitive, and based more on transactional exchanges than genuine connection and mutual support. We're encouraged to maintain large but superficial social networks, to compete with friends and family for status and resources, and to seek romantic relationships based on surface-level criteria like physical appearance, social standing, or lifestyle compatibility. Many people end up surrounded by hundreds of acquaintances but feel deeply lonely, or they remain in emotionally draining relationships because they fear loneliness or social judgment. Those who've broken free prioritize quality over quantity in all their relationships, preferring a few true friends over many shallow ones. They've learned to set healthy boundaries, to say no to social commitments that don't enrich their lives, and to seek out people who support their personal growth, even if that means challenging social norms. Their romantic relationships tend to be based on shared values and life vision more than physical attraction or social convenience. This change often leads to smaller but far more fulfilling social circles and to a sense of authentic belonging that doesn't depend on conformity or performance. The sixth and perhaps deepest sign is a fundamental shift in their relationship with time and mortality itself. Most people live as if they were immortal, endlessly postponing the things that truly matter while getting lost in artificial urgencies and endless distractions. They spend years or decades in jobs they hate, stay in relationships that don't nourish them, put off trips or experiences they dream of, and rarely reflect on the fact that life is finite, that each passing day is a day that will never return. This denial of life's impermanence is encouraged by a culture that promotes eternal youth, future material success, and constant gratification through consumption and entertainment. Those who've broken free have developed a sharp awareness of life's brevity, which motivates them to make more deliberate and meaningful choices. They don't live in fear of death, but with deep respect for the limited time they have, leading them to prioritize experiences, relationships, and activities that truly matter to them. This awareness doesn't make them morbid or anxious, but more present, more grateful, and more focused on what truly counts. They tend to make decisions based on how they'll feel about them on their deathbed, which naturally leads to a more authentic life aligned with their deepest values. Let me ask you, as we explore these ideas together, how many of these signs do you recognize in your own journey? Perhaps you've started to question some of these invisible structures we've mentioned, or maybe you still feel fully immersed in the systems we've described. Whatever your current situation may be, know that recognizing these patterns is the first step toward greater autonomy and authenticity. If any of these signs resonated with your experience, share your reflection in the comments by completing the sentence. I started to outsmart the system when I realized that I was. Your honesty may inspire others going through the same awakening process, reminding them that we are not alone on this path toward greater awareness and personal freedom. It is important to understand that overcoming these systems does not mean completely rejecting society or living as a hermit isolated from the world. Many of the structures we question arose for valid reasons and continue to serve important functions for the functioning of human civilization. The goal is not to destroy these structures, but rather to develop the ability to consciously choose when and how we engage with them, instead of being automatically controlled by them. It is about developing what we might call personal sovereignty, the ability to live according to our own values and priorities, even when they diverge from prevailing social expectations. This sovereignty is not selfishness or irresponsibility, but rather a mature way of participating in society from a place of authenticity and conscious choice. Modern technology, particularly the internet and social media, has created both new opportunities to escape these traditional systems and new methods of control and manipulation that are even more sophisticated. On one hand, it has never been easier to work independently, learn new skills, connect with like-minded people around the world, or access information that was once available only to privileged elites. On the other hand, the same technologies are used to create algorithms that manipulate our attention, platforms that addict us to superficial social validation, and surveillance systems that monitor and influence our behavior in ways we are only beginning to understand. The challenge for anyone seeking greater autonomy is to learn to use these tools consciously and deliberately, extracting their benefits without becoming enslaved by their more manipulative and addictive aspects. When we look at human history from a broad perspective, we can see that there have always been individuals who managed to transcend the control systems of their time and live according to higher principles of freedom, creativity, and authenticity. These were the philosophers, artists, inventors, and spiritual leaders who expanded the boundaries of what was possible for our species and opened path to more evolved forms of human existence. They were not necessarily people with special resources or unique privileges, but rather individuals who developed the courage and wisdom to question the fundamental premises of their time and live according to their own discoveries about what truly matters in life. In our time, when social control systems have become more sophisticated and pervasive than ever before in human history, it may be more important than ever to cultivate this capacity for independence and discernment. The journey to overcome these systems is neither easy nor quick, and often involves periods of isolation, misunderstanding, and even ridicule from those who remain fully immersed in conventional structures. It may mean earning less money, having less social prestige, or facing pressure from family and friends who do not understand the choices you are making. But for those who persist on this path, the rewards are extraordinary. A sense of authenticity and alignment that simply cannot be bought or achieved through conventional means, deeper and more meaningful relationships. A creativity and energy that arises when we stop spending our life force on activities that do not nourish us, and most importantly, an inner peace that comes from knowing we are living according to our deepest values, regardless of what others may think or say. The world is undergoing accelerated transformations that make increasingly clear the unsustainability of many of the systems that have governed our civilization over the past decades. Climate change, growing inequality, political instability, and the emergence of disruptive technologies such as artificial intelligence are forcing humanity to rethink fundamental assumptions about how we organize our society, our economy, and our personal lives. In this context of change and uncertainty, those who have already developed greater independence and flexibility in relation to conventional systems are better prepared to navigate the transformations ahead and perhaps contribute to the creation of wiser and more sustainable forms of social organization. If these reflections have touched on something you've been feeling, but perhaps haven't found the words to express, know that you are not alone. By subscribing to the channel, you'll connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for a deeper understanding of the philosophical challenges of our time. Each week, we gather here to explore together the big questions that define our era and to seek not only understanding, but also wiser ways of living amid the transformations we are witnessing. This is not just a channel, but a space for dialogue and collective growth where we can honestly examine the systems that govern us and discover paths toward greater freedom and authenticity. Join us on this ongoing journey of questioning and discovery, because the questions we explore here are not merely philosophical abstractions, but practical tools for creating a fuller and more meaningful life in a world that often leaves us disoriented and fragmented. The truth is that each person who manages to at least partially overcome these systems of control not only transforms their own life, but also serves as an example and inspiration for others who may be starting to question conventional structures. In a world where conformity is often rewarded and authenticity punished, those who choose to live according to their own principles become beacons of possibility, demonstrating that there is an alternative to the life of quiet desperation that Thoreau observed as the fate of most men. It is not about becoming a rebel for rebellion's sake, but about developing the maturity and courage necessary to live a life that is truly your own, a life you can look back on with pride and satisfaction, knowing you made your own choices and followed your own path regardless of external pressures and expectations. This is perhaps the greatest adventure available to any human being. The journey of self-discovery and self-liberation that allows us to transcend the limitations imposed by the systems we were born into and create an existence that reflects our highest values and most authentic potential. It is not a journey that ends, but rather a continuous process of growth, questioning, and refinement that makes each day more interesting and meaningful than would be possible within the conventional parameters of success and happiness that our culture offers us.
Hello, Yuval. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
It's
good to be here.
A real pleasure to be here with Yuval. He is not only a great historian, as you all know, he is a very kind man. In the green room, among his many duties, signing books, answering my questions about Israeli politics, he also helped read a bedtime story to my 10-year-old, who is a huge fan of Unstoppable Us. So thank you, Yuval.
It's my pleasure.
All right, so what I want to do in this book is I want to go through some of the history, some of the stories you tell. I'm going to ask you a few questions about characters you introduce, the ideas they represent. We'll go through some of the arguments you make about history, about AI, and about democracy. And then I hope there'll be some time at the end to go through some of your apocalyptic thought experiments. Does that work?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. And I have a whole series of questions, several thousand that people have sent in. I appreciate that. We'll get to those as well. First question. What is that bird?
Oh, that's a difficult question. It's a pigeon.
I mean, thank you. Oh, geez. What does the bird represent, and why is it on the cover of your book about the history of the world?
Well, for two main reasons. First of all, in Hebrew, there is no difference between a pigeon and a dove. I know that in English, in the English-speaking world, pigeons are often called rats with wings, whereas doves are thought of as these white angels of peace. But in Hebrew, they are the same. And there are no doves in the Middle East. Maybe this is why there is no peace in the Middle East. There are only pigeons. And in the Bible, in the story of Noah and the flood, so he sends a pigeon, not a dove, to see if the flood is over. So we are now living in the midst of a flood of information. And this is kind of my pigeon being sent to see if the flood is over. And the other reason is that one of the chief characters of the book is a pigeon called Cherami, which was 100 years ago was basically the most famous bird in the world. And I think he is still on display in the Smithsonian, not far from here. And
tell the story of Cherami, because it's actually, I think, quite important to the arguments you make in the book.
Yeah, so how did this bird become the most famous bird in the world? So during the First World War, when the American expeditionary force fought in northern France against the Germans, so an American battalion was caught behind German lines, surrounded by the Germans, and American artillery, which tried to provide them with cover fire, didn't know their exact location and actually dropped the artillery barrage right on the American soldiers, adding to the problems. And they tried to send runners to division headquarters to inform the commanders where the battalion actually is, but none of them could get through the German lines, so they turned to the only thing that could, which was a carrier pigeon, Cherami. And the commander wrote this tiny note on a piece of paper and attached it to the leg of the pigeon, and they released it to the air, and the pigeon flew through the German fire. It was hit several times. It lost the other leg, luckily not the leg with the note. It was shot through the breast, but it nevertheless managed to get through. And the artillery barrage was lifted, and help was sent to the right place, and the battalion, which was known as the Lost Battalion, was saved. And the pigeon, which was called Cherami, was then hailed as the bird that saved hundreds of American soldiers from death or captivity at the hands of the Germans. At least this was the story, which was repeated again and again in army communiques, in the newspapers. There are movies, there are children's books. So if you want to read a story, there is still a children's book about Cherami, the brave pigeon. A recent historical research that delved into the archives raised a lot of question marks about this whole story. First of all, it now turns out that the headquarters learned about the right location of the battalion before the pigeon arrived. And then it turned out that nobody is sure that the pigeon was actually Cherami. That it could have been a completely different pigeon. But still, the Cherami was displayed in the Smithsonian for years and became a pilgrimage site for veterans of the First World War, and was the most famous bird in the world. And this is part of what the book is about the power of information on the one hand, and about the tension between the truth and the stories we tell, and the effectiveness of stories which are not necessarily always truthful.
And that's why it caught my attention, because, as you may have heard in America, we still have some of these issues, and in fact, often with animals. And so I'm going to read a quote that one of our modern philosophers dealing with the same issue, J.D. Vance, said yesterday. If I have to create stories so that the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of the American people, then that's what I'm going to do. You are in favor of that, correct?
I'm not saying I'm in favor. I'm saying that this is what is happening throughout human history.
Yeah.
That, again, most information is not the truth. The truth is a rare and costly subset of information. If you want to write a true story, you need to invest a lot of time and effort and money, whereas fiction or fantasy, they are very cheap. You just write the first thing that comes to your mind. The truth also tends to be complicated, because reality is complicated, whereas fiction, you can make it as simple as you like it to be, and people usually prefer simple stories. And the last disadvantage of the truth is that the truth is often painful, whether on the individual level, or if you talk about, say, Israeli politics, on the national level. There are many things people don't want to know about themselves, about their nation, about the world. And fiction can be made as flattering as you would like it to be. So in a competition between something which is cheap and simple and flattering, and something which is costly and complicated and sometimes painful, it's obvious who is going to win unless you give the truth some help.
This is the exact argument I made to my board yesterday while I'm trying to raise money for our fact-checking department. But let me ask you then about the question of a noble lie, because it's clear that history is determined by the people who tell the stories, which have either truth in them or they don't have truth in them. And you are not as dismissive of the idea of a noble lie as I expected you would be when I began the book. Explain in what circumstances it is okay for someone who is telling a story to not tell it exactly truthfully for the greater good of some kind.
It is impossible for a story to be an exact replica of reality. You know, there is a famous Borges story about an empire that wants to create a totally truthful map, which will be exactly an exact representation of reality. And they end up producing a map with a scale of 1:1. Because this is the only map which will be 100% truthful and accurate and will not simplify anything, will not change anything. It will have to be a 1:1 map. And so the empire was covered by a map of the empire. And the effort of creating this empire, this map, exhausted the resources of the empire that therefore collapsed. And we are now in a similar situation to some extent. There is a crisis of representation in the world. That no representation seems good enough for us. Because no representation can actually be a 1:1 map of the world. This is simply impossible. And we are not sure what to do about it. Now, my position is that every story to some extent is fictional. Because every story, you can't tell the whole truth. This is simply impossible. And there are cases that, yes, you need to simplify. As somebody who wrote, the history of the world in 500 pages, I know that sometimes you have to simplify. And fiction in itself is not necessarily bad. The rules of football or baseball, they are fictional. We invented them. It doesn't mean that they are bad. Fictional literature is not all bad. The key is that fiction should acknowledge its fictionality and not pretend to be reality. And when you think about the cultural or political implications of that, if you want to unite a large number of people, you need to use some stories, some mythologies. And this is not necessarily bad as long as you acknowledge what you're doing. So if we compare, for instance, two foundational texts of human history, if you compare the 10 Commandments and the US Constitution, so one text acknowledges its fictionality and the other doesn't. The 10 Commandments doesn't acknowledge that it emerged from human imagination. It claims to be the product of divine intelligence, to come down from heaven. And the downside of that is that it has no mechanism to admit and correct its own mistakes. And for instance, the 10 Commandments, as they were written, sometime in the first millennium BCE, they endorse slavery. Many people don't think about it or don't notice it, but the 10th commandment actually endorses slavery. It says it's okay to hold slaves because the 10th commandment says that you should not covet your neighbor's field or ox or slaves, which implies that God has no problem with people holding slaves. God has a problem only if you covet the slaves of your neighbor. No, that's not okay. That will make God angry. And compare that to the US Constitution, which also, like the 10 Commandments, have served as the basis for large-scale human cooperation, for legal systems, for political systems. Whereas the 10 Commandments start with, I am your Lord God, the US Constitution starts with, we the people. We the people invented this document. We invented these laws. And therefore, because it acknowledges that it emerges from the human imagination, it's humans who wrote this document, it also acknowledged the potential that there might be mistakes in the document, and it has a mechanism to amend itself, which was eventually used to amend the US Constitution, which again initially endorsed slavery and was eventually amended to forbid, to ban slavery. Whereas with the 10 Commandments, because they claim to be just, they came down from heaven, there is no mechanism to change the text. There is no 11th commandment which tells people, well, if you don't like something in the 10th commandment, if you have a 2/3 majority, you can change the text. No, there is no mechanism.
I would think it might be possible for Pope Francis to change the second commandment better than the US Congress could change the Second Amendment, but that's where we are. All right, let's stick with religion. I want you to tell the story that I think comes up in at least 3 very consequential parts of the book is the story of the Council of Hippo in Carthage and the consequences of selecting 1 Timothy into the New Testament instead of the Acts of Paul and Thecla. Will you explain that story? I think it's a very important follow-on to what you were just saying about the power of story, and I swear to God, we'll get to AI in just a minute, but this is an important premise for that.
We can actually start with AI, which is very, very relevant to the Church Council of Carthage, which took place in what is today Tunisia in 397 CE. Because AI, one of the first big things that we saw it do, that shaping human history, is taking the power of recommendation. That if you go on social media, what you see there is the result of recommendations made by social media algorithms. And the power to recommend to people what stories to read or what videos to watch is extremely important. And one of the best examples in history for the power of recommendation is the editorial process that created the Bible in the New Testament. The people who created the New Testament are not the authors of the texts. They are the editors who decided what will be in and what will be out. Because, there was no New Testament, there was no Bible in the time of Jesus or in the time of St. Paul. They never read the Bible, it didn't exist. In the first 4 centuries of Christianity, Christians produced an enormous number and enormous variety of texts. There were stories about Christ, there were prophecies, doomsday prophecies about the apocalypse, there were letters by St. Paul, by other church leaders, there were lots of fake letters that people wrote things in the name of St. Paul like 200 years after the man was dead. So Christian communities were again flooded by a very large number of texts, and a question arose: what should good Christians read? They needed a recommendation list, the same way that today we are flooded by TV series, and we need a recommendation list, what to watch. So in the late 4th century, a committee was set up, a church council, theologians, bishops. They met first in Hippo, in what is today, I think, Algeria, then in Carthage, in what is today Tunisia, and they hammered out a recommendation list, top 27 texts every Christian should read. And this became the New Testament. They didn't write the text. They went over, again, very large numbers of texts that existed at the time and chose what will be in and what will be out. And this shaped Christianity and the views of billions of people on numerous issues until this very day. And to give you just one example out of many, so one very popular text with Christians at the time was the Acts of Paul and Thecla. Paul is Saint Paul, and Thecla was one of the most favorite saints of the time. She was a woman disciple of Paul, and she was a leader of the community. She preached, she performed miracles, she baptized, and she was hailed as an example that women can be leaders in the church. And women can preach, and women can baptize and perform miracles. So this was one popular text with one view of women. Then there was another text, a letter, allegedly from St. Paul to Timothy, which most scholars today think is a much later forgery. It was not written by St. Paul in the 1st century, probably forged in his name sometime in the 2nd century. And in this letter, a completely different view of women and their role in the church. It says that women should be obedient, should be silent, should never be leaders. They should fulfill themselves by doing whatever men tell them to do, and by having children and raising children. This is their role in life. And the committee in Carthage decided to exclude the Acts of Paul and Thecla from the top 27, but to include this letter to Timothy, which is still part of the New Testament around the world, as 1 Timothy. And this has shaped the views of billions of Christians about women in the church and also in general for more than 1,500 years. This is the power of recommendation. And now this power, and this connects to AI, this is the power which is increasingly held by AI algorithms. We have now this kind of huge public debate about social media and the spread of fake news and conspiracy theories and so forth on social media. And you hear people like Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg saying that we don't want to censor anybody, that this is an issue of freedom of speech. But it's not. The problem with the spread of this type of information on social media is not human users producing certain lies or fictions or fake news. The real problem is corporate algorithms deciding which stories to recommend, which stories to promote. And the power that was held by the bishops in the Council of Carthage and the power that was held by newspaper editors in recent generations, this is now the power in the hands of the social media algorithms. And this should be at the center of the debate, which we'll get to. On regulation, it's not about the freedom of speech of humans. It's about the responsibility of the corporate algorithms. Because if a corporate algorithm decides to promote a certain conspiracy, this is not on the person who invented it. This is the decision of the algorithm and the decision of its human corporate masters, and this is what should be at the center of the debate.
So what I'm hearing is if the Council of Carthage had been slightly different, women would have been empowered much sooner. We would have had a feminist revolution several centuries earlier. Probably AI would have been invented, and we all would be obliterated by now. Is that correct, Yuval?
That's one possibility. I mean, you can never, I mean, history is extremely surprising.
Yeah, no, I know.
You can never predict the outcome.
You can't unspool one thread from the tapestry. Let's go to some of the concerns you have about AI. I want to go through some of the concerns very quickly, and then I want to go through your philosophy of how these algorithms should be structured. But very briefly, in just a word or two, explain why modern AI might destroy democracy.
Ooh. Very briefly. Well, very briefly, democracy is a conversation. Now, dictatorship is one person dictating everything. That's dictatorship. Democracy is when a group of people have a conversation in order to decide what to do about any major question. Now, to have a conversation is not an easy thing. And there are technical difficulties. If you have 20 people trying to have a conversation, so they can all gather in a room and talk with each other. But how can 20 million people have a conversation? You need some kind of technology in order to do that. Now, until the modern age, there was just no technology to facilitate large-scale conversations, which is why there were no large-scale democracies anywhere in the world. The only examples we have of ancient democracies, they are all small-scale. They are city-states like Athens or Republican Rome, just one city, or they are even smaller, tribes and bands and villages. We have many examples of these small-scale democracies, not a single example of a large-scale democracy in the ancient world. All large-scale polities are authoritarian. We begin to see large-scale democracies only after the rise of modern information technology. The first crucial technology is the newspaper, and then we have the telegraph, and the radio, and the television, and suddenly it becomes feasible. There are other conditions that have to be met. It doesn't guarantee democracy, just that you have a newspaper. You have newspapers and radio also in the Soviet Union. But it becomes possible for the first time in history to have large-scale democracies. And it's important to understand that because it means that information technology is not a side dish, that you have democracy, and on the side you have all these issues with information technology. No, information technology is the basis of democracy. Democracy is built on top of this technology. So any major change in information technology is likely to cause an earthquake in democracy, which is built on top of it. And this is what we are now seeing all over the world. What we are seeing all over the world is the collapse of the democratic conversation. We have the most sophisticated information technology in human history, and people are losing the ability to talk with each other, and even more so, to listen to each other. And in every country where this is happening, there are these unique explanations of what is happening in our country. Why can't Democrats and Republicans in the US have a conversation anymore? And you go to Israel, to my country, you hear the unique explanation of what is wrong with Israel. And then you go to Brazil, and then you have the unique explanations of what's wrong with Brazilian society. But you see, the same thing is happening everywhere. The conversation is collapsing, and this is not because of some special feature in the history or society or economy of the country. It's a universal earthquake which results from the rise of this new information technology that originally the developers of the technology promised to us that it will spread the truth and bring tyrannies down and strengthen democracies, but it is doing the opposite. And very briefly, one way to visualize what is happening is imagine that democracy is a group of humans standing and having a conversation, and suddenly a group of robots enter the circle and start talking very loudly, very persuasively, very emotionally, and we can't tell who is a human and who is a robot. This is what has been happening over the last 10, 15 years, and the result is that the conversation is breaking down. And again, this is not a uniquely American phenomenon. It is happening all over the world, leading more and more to the rise of dictatorships, because dictatorships don't need conversations. Again, there is one person dictating everything.
Well, let's push on that assumption for a second. So I could have a different metaphor, which is not a bunch of robots enter the conversation, but a bunch of infinitely intelligent aides join me, and they help me sort through the conversation, and they help me prepare for what I'm going to ask. And then not only that, if you look at the last year, obviously Venezuela, tragic example, but we had, elections are not the same as democracy, but we'll use them as a proxy for this hypothetical. We had reasonably positive elections, if you're in favor of democracy, in Poland. We had a little bit of progress in Turkey, serious progress in India, in fact, where an illiberal democracy has actually been challenged. We had an extremely smooth election leading to the election of a Jewish woman in Mexico. We had extremely swift and effective, no deepfakes, maybe don't like the outcome of the election in France. Similar election in the United Kingdom. I mean, the world's doing all right on these elections despite the challenges of social media, AI, everything else.
And it's not that it's already a done deal. It's not that democracy has collapsed. But if you look at the health of democracies today compared to 10 years ago or 15 years ago, at least the momentum is very worrying. And again, it's not, I don't think, what really surprises me when I look at the examples from around the world is that it's not about some huge ideological gaps. Actually, the ideological gaps between the different camps today in a place like the US are much smaller than 50 years ago. What worries is the kind of temperature of the argument, and again, this inability to have a reasoned debate, to have a reasoned conversation. Simply having elections is important, but it is not enough. Elections are not democracy. And even in some of the examples you mentioned, so it's not about who wins, which 51% win in the end. It's about the relation between the 51% and the 49%. And democracy shouldn't feel like every election is a life and death struggle, that if we lose this, it might collapse. And even more so, it shouldn't feel like a war between enemies. If a country reaches a situation when people view their political rivals as enemies, then democracy cannot survive for long, because then every election, again, it's like a war. You do anything to win. If you lose, you have no incentive to accept the verdict. If you win, you only take care of your tribe. What is happening in this situation, that a nation breaks down into tribes, leading eventually either to tribal warfare and civil war or to dictatorship. I think that the key thing here also has to do not just with democracy, but also with nationalism. and with the breakdown of national communities. That many people think that democracy and nationalism, or democracy and patriotism, are somehow opposites, but they go together, they must go together. Democracy functions well only when there is a national community, only when you feel that you really care about the other people in your country and that they really care about you. If a nation reaches a point when there is no longer a nation, there are warring tribes, and each tribe cares only about itself, then it's only a question of time before democracy collapses. And this is really the worrying trend that we see in many places around the world, irrespective of the results of the latest elections here or there. And this, again, it goes back to the type of communication between people. Can we, for instance, listen to people with different views from our own without thinking that they are enemies?
I learned in the green room that one of the ways that Yuval avoids arguing with bots on Twitter is that he, as he says, is he's stuck in the 90s and uses email and the telephone. Let me ask you a question then. All right, so we're headed into this age. I will certainly agree that democracy is at risk, and I will certainly agree it is at risk for the reasons you give, and I will certainly agree that we will soon have extremely powerful AI algorithms that will underlie a lot of the decisions we make and a lot of the thinking that goes on in our own heads. In a very important section in the book, you lay out 4 values that you think should be embedded in AI systems, and they are benevolence, right? AI systems should be benevolent, seems reasonable. Decentralized, mutuality, you should understand about it, what it understands about you, and the ability to evolve, much as you said about the US Constitution versus the 10 Commandments. So a question for you, what happens when some of these come into conflict with each other, right? So when I read that section, I thought, well, benevolence kind of is in tension with decentralization, because if you decentralize these algorithms, then suddenly you have all kinds of algorithms, you have all kinds of options, you have all kinds of different companies, some of which will be benevolent as you define it, some will not be benevolent as you define it. Well, how is one supposed to weigh these 4 principles for designing future AI systems? Because weighing them correctly seems pretty important to getting the world you want.
Yeah, with benevolence, I mean something very, very narrow, and something we've known for centuries. Simply that if you get hold of my information, you should use it for my benefit and not in order to manipulate me. Which is a basic principle that we already have with our doctors and our lawyers and our accountants and our therapists, and it should be no different with the people who provide us with digital services like social media or like email. Like my personal physician...
But pause for a second. Facebook would not have said it's manipulating us even when in the sort of the heyday of its algorithm. It would have said it's giving us what we want.
That's one way of putting it. And the Facebook algorithm has enormous power over us. And Facebook's business model, and the business model of most of these social media companies, it is based on increasing user engagement. And engagement sounds like a nice thing, but who doesn't want to be engaged? But for them, for the companies, it means that we need to spend more time on the platform, because the more time I spend on it, the more money they make, either by showing me advertisements and commercials or by collecting my data and then giving it or selling it to third parties. And whether this is what I want or not, that's a very big question. Do I really want to spend more and more time on the platform? Now, what their algorithms do is, by trial and error, they find my weaknesses, and they use my weaknesses to keep me glued to the screen for longer. This is the basic idea of hacking. How do you hack a smartphone or a computer or a program? You look for the weaknesses in the code. It's the same with human beings. This is how you hack human beings. You use these algorithms to find the weaknesses in our code. Each person with their own weaknesses. It's not one size fits all. What makes me angry? What do I already hate? What do I already fear, or what I'm greedy for? And they give me more and more and more of that. It's like, the food companies that learn that if you pump something full of sugar and fat and salt, people would want more of it. Now, is it really good for us or not? Again, there is a question here. It's not an easy thing to solve. But this is the key of the dilemma, the key of the discussion. And again, the main message is that ultimately it should not be about the profits of the corporation, but whether consuming all this information is really good for me or not. And one last point, I think like in the example of food, we've reached a point when I think most people need an information diet. That this simplistic idea that more information is always good for us is simply wrong, the same way that more food is not always good for us.
Well, that's why everybody should subscribe to The Atlantic. Let me give you a thought experiment. Because part of what I think is going to, for your system to come down and to work, it's going to depend a little bit on who defines benevolence and who defines these values. And so I want to give you a thought experiment from a conversation I had at a bar not long ago. So I met somebody. I'm going to change some of the details because I can't reveal who they are and what exactly they do. But it was an engineer who works in AI, and they make algorithms. And their current job is that they work for the state of Texas, and they're in charge of the sentencing algorithm. And so they're in charge of an AI algorithm that will determine how long somebody who's guilty will be sent to prison. And so they have hard tasks, right? They have to make sure any algorithm that is trained on historical data will have the biases of that historical data. So you train a sentencing algorithm on historic Texas data, it will be racist, so you have to control for that. You may let the women out sooner, you have to make sure that's proper and right. And you go back through and you control through it and you try to fix that. And so we're having a long conversation, and I'm asking her, well, how do you control for this, and how do you control for that, and how do you control for this? And eventually she says, you know what I do, Nick? She said, I've rigged the algorithm. And I've rigged it in such a way that everybody will be sentenced for much less time than the state of Texas did before. And I've done it in such a way the state of Texas will never figure out that I've done that. Is that something that an AI engineer should be doing?
That's extremely dangerous.
Extremely dangerous, but it may be a value that many liberals agree with, and they feel like conservative states have sentenced people for too long. So it's embedding a value that that person feels is benevolent into a system and leading to what they believe is justice.
At the very least, when we are talking about, the law of a country, this should be left to the citizens and to the voters, and not to the, a dictatorship of an engineer.
Well, they've given the power to hire whatever contractor they want to the state. They've elected, the governor of the state of Texas, and they've hired this person. The state is not Texas where this is happening, so don't Google sentencing algorithm. It's a different thing in a different place. You won't be able to figure it out, but it's the same example.
I think that the key point that is raised by this example is the issue of unfathomability. To what extent we can still understand the systems that control our lives.
Yeah.
When I get this question a lot of what really frightens me about AI. And you have these kind of Hollywood science fiction scenarios of the big robot rebellion, and the robots are rebelling and coming to kill us, and this is unlikely to happen anytime soon. But what is already happening, this is not a science fiction scenario for the future. What is already happening is that we basically have millions of AI bureaucrats, millions of bureaucratic algorithms making more and more decisions about our life. We apply to a bank to get a loan, it's an AI deciding. We committed a crime, they send us to prison, it's increasingly an AI deciding for how long. And this could rise to the level of key economic and financial decisions about what would be the rate of interest of the Federal Reserve. This could increasingly be a decision made by AIs and not human beings. And there are many good reasons why to give this kind of power to AIs. But what happened down the road when eventually so many of these crucial decisions about us are made in a way that we simply cannot understand? We don't know why the bank refused us a loan. We don't know why they sent us to 5 years and not 4 years or 6 years in prison. We don't know why the interest rate is 4% and not 3%. And we don't know, not because somebody's hiding it from us, simply because it's far too complicated for the human brain. That the advantage of AI, the good side of AI, that it can analyze much more data than any human brain, find patterns that we can't, deal with mathematical complexities which are way beyond what we can deal with. But the downside of all that is, what is the meaning, for instance, of democracy? If increasingly all the decisions, or at least many of the decisions, are made in a way which are not transparent and therefore not accountable to human beings.
Let's go through another one, which is somewhat similar. So one of the companies that makes AI systems is Anthropic. And they use this system called constitutional AI as they choose how they write their prompts and how they structure their algorithm, which is probably the closest of the major AI companies to, as I understand it, the philosophy of Yuval Harari. And so when it gives an answer, it checks whether the answer would abide by the UN Declaration of Human Rights, right? It actually follows like the US Constitution, the UN Declaration of Human Rights, and Apple's Terms of Service. It's very funny. But in any event, the biggest problem that they have and the other AI companies is they don't know, just as you said, they don't know why things make decisions. And so they've been trying to understand what's called interpretability. And so they went in and they said, well, let's see what happens if we go into all of our training data and we add a little extra weight to everything that has to do with the Golden Gate Bridge. So if there's a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge, we'll weigh it double. If there's a mention of the Golden Gate Bridge, we'll weigh it double. If there's a box score about the San Francisco Giants, we'll weigh that a little more than one about the Philadelphia Phillies. They do all that, and then they ask Claude, tell me a love story. And naturally, the love story takes place on the Golden Gate Bridge, right? If you mess with the training data and the weights, you get some of these interesting outcomes. So then the question for you would be, if we can do this, why not go into the AI and not weight it towards the Golden Gate Bridge, but weight it towards love, compassion, benevolence? Is that a good idea?
I'm not sure what it means in a technical sense, but when I look at human history, I know that quite often in history, people talk about love, or they start with love, and very quickly they get to hate and to war. The Christianity, which sees itself, and going back to the Council of Carthage, sees itself as the religion of love, that it's all about love, was responsible for more violence than any other religion or ideology in history. And they somehow found a way how, out of love, we wage crusades, and we build inquisitions, and we burn heretics at the stake. It's all out of love. And they really believed it.
They also gave us Bach.
But again, the way that I think this often happens is that if you think that you are motivated by love, and if you think that you're trying to build utopia, whoever stands in your way must be demonic. Whoever stands in your way must be evil. The more good I am, then any opposition is, by definition, it's not just somebody who thinks differently, but they are evil. Now, again, I'm not sure how to translate that into AI speak, but again, one of the lessons from history is that just thinking that because we have these kind of good weights, we've weighted our holy book, we've weighted the code in favor of love. Anything that has love, it got extra. Anything that has compassion, it got extra. And somehow from that, you get the Inquisition. So if it happens with humans, I would also be very worried about AI. But what we need, the basic thing that, again, we learn again and again in history is that we need a self-correcting mechanism. We can't trust that just because something has these good values at its basis, what will come out of it will also necessarily be benevolent and compassionate. We saw it again in the modern age with Marxism. which begins with, these wonderful ideas of equality and of compassion, and ends with the gulags. And if you're really convinced that you're coming from a good foundation, and also if you think that you're in the process of building utopia, then it gives you an open check to do the most horrible things on the way to utopia. And again, anything that stands in your way is then transformed from political rivalry to kind of demonic possession.
I mean, in some ways, this is one of the scariest things you said, because the people who are building the AI models genuinely do believe they're leading us to utopia, right?
And that's very, very dangerous, because this is what gives them the open check. They say, we're building utopia, so anything that kind of we have to sacrifice on the way is worth it, because when you would look at the bottom line, and this was the basic argument also of people like Lenin and Stalin. Yes, we have to murder these millions of people, but in the end, when we build utopia, real existing socialism here on Earth, it will turn out that it's, these billions who died in the Gulag, this was worth it.
Man, I had never thought of the Khmer Rouge at the same time I thought of Anthropic, but here we are. But hold on, Yuval. In the next couple weeks, I think, where were you last? You were last in Toronto. You're probably going to move west, and you're probably going to sit down, and you're going to sit down with all these people because they all read your books, right? There's this famous image of Jeff Bezos, and he's giving this interview, and he's got like 4 books behind him on his bookshelf, and like plants, and and 3 of them are Yuval's, I believe. So you're going to be talking to these folks, and so what you're telling me is that if, say, Dario Modi, the guy who runs Anthropic, is there, he's like, we're trying to figure out what to train on, and I've been thinking we should train it on. We should just train it on sort of positive, uplifting, factual stories. I really don't think we should, train it on everything, which includes like serial killers' diaries. And you're going to say like, no, put the serial killers' diaries in there because, don't just train it on your definition of love. Is that what you're going to argue to them?
No, I mean, I would basically say that I don't know how to train AIs. This is not my field. But no matter what kind of positive basis you give it, and no matter what positive intentions you have, your number one assumption should be that this thing is not infallible. I'm not infallible. There is a high chance for mistakes, and therefore I need to leave room for correction. The most important thing when you build it is build a mechanism for identifying and correcting the mistakes. Again, this is also the advice that I would have gave Lenin in 1917. Like, you're going on this huge experiment, you're thinking that you're building utopia, start with the assumption that you will make mistakes, include in the structure, say, of the Soviet Union, mechanisms for identifying and correcting the mistakes of the system, including the mistakes of Lenin and of whoever is going to succeed you, which is the one thing they didn't do.
Yeah, Lenin should have read *Sapiens*. I have an image of him reading it on the train there. All right, let's talk a little bit about cocoons, which is one of the extremely interesting parts of your book. So you make an argument, and you say that there are some fundamental human issues, like the separation of mind and body. You tell the story of Martin Luther. It's actually a way of telling the story of Martin Luther I had not read before. But you argue that what could happen in an age of AI is that you end up with some civilizations that have a totally different understanding of what is the mind and what is the body, and therefore totally different judicial systems. So it's one of the most mind-bending parts of the book. I'd like you to explain this to the audience.
Ooh. So there is a lot of explaining. I'll try to do it short. I mean, first of all, about the cocoons, it's the changing of the metaphors in this age of information revolution. That 30 years ago, the dominant metaphor was the web, the World Wide Web, and the web was supposed to connect everything and everybody. And over the years, the web kind of closed in on us, and now it's the cocoons. That every person or every group is enclosed within an information cocoon, and sometimes, your next door neighbors are in a different cocoon than you, and there is just no way to access from one to the other. And an extreme example of where this can go, like today, people don't agree, like in the United States, about who won the last elections. This can go to a place where people don't agree what a human is, or what a person is, and what are the relations between mind and body. One of the recurrent arguments throughout history that we see in many traditions, in Judaism, in Christianity, in Hinduism, in Buddhism, is what exactly is a human being, and what is the relation between mind and body, or between soul and spirit and body. So if we again go back to the age of the Council of Carthage and early Christianity, so Judaism and the first Christians, which came out of Judaism, they viewed humans as embodied entities. The body was central. We are bodies. The soul, biblical Judaism did not talk at all about the soul. The idea that there could be a soul that exists separately from the body, unheard of in biblical Judaism. It's all about the body. And also the first Christians, they focus on the body. The whole idea originally is that God is incarnated in the flesh. The flesh is at the center. And after Jesus is crucified, he's supposed to come back in the flesh. And the kingdom of God is supposed to be a material kingdom of fleshy bodies on the earth. But eventually, under influences of Platonic philosophies and other influences, and also for practical purposes, because the kingdom of God was nowhere to be seen, and the really big problem for early Christians is that they won. You know, when you're a persecuted minority, a sect, you can have all these promises, okay, when we finally gain power, then we'll have the kingdom of God. And then they have one of the biggest disasters that can happen to any religion, they gain power. They become the dominant religion of the Roman Empire, so okay, so where's the kingdom of God? And there is no kingdom of God. You still have the same wars and corruptions and civil wars and executions and human greed, and it's all the same. So they say, okay, the kingdom of God is not on earth. It's on a different level of reality. It's in heaven. And you can't access it in the flesh. After you die, your soul will get to heaven. And many Christians drift towards a very different view of humans, as a dualistic view actually, that my real essence is my soul, which is entrapped in a material, biological, filthy body with all these sexual passions and all these lusts. And the hope, the ideal, is that eventually the soul will be released from this earthly, fleshy prison and get to a purely immaterial realm, which is heaven, where it will exist forever and ever. And throughout the 2,000 years of Christian history, you see this tension. They can never really abandon the body, partly because the Bible is full of it. And again, Christ was incarnated in the body, in the flesh, and rose and came back to life in the flesh. And there is very little about this immaterial realm of pure souls in the Bible itself. It all mostly came later. So there is this constant arguments that often leads to blows and to wars of religion. And in the early century of the church, one of the biggest arguments was about the nature of Jesus Christ himself, with one camp saying that he was entirely a human, made of flesh, another camp saying that he was entirely divine and non-material, a spiritual being, and there was a third camp who said that he was non-binary. And the non-binaries won. This was the eventually official doctrine of the church. He is non-binary. He's both and none at the same time. But huge arguments and also violence around these issues. Now, how does all this relate to AI? We are going to have another round of this mind-body debate. We are already in the midst of it. what is your identity? What defines your identity? Is your identity defined by your biological body? Or is your identity defined by what you believe about yourself, by your faith? You know, people like Martin Luther, they said sola fide. The only thing that matters is what you believe. And we are now living in a kind of new round of this debate, with some people say if you go online, you can be whatever you want. The biological body sitting in front of the screen should not limit the identities that you can adopt. Other people say, no, 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 there is a biological body. This is the center of your identity. You cannot ignore your biological body. And as everybody knows, this is a very heated debate right now. And this also potentially will influence how we treat AIs. AIs have no bodies, but they will increasingly be able to interact with us and to press our emotional buttons and even to pretend to have emotions of themselves. Now, people who give primacy to the body in the identity of a person will resist treating AIs as persons. People who think that identity has little to do with biology will have a much easier time giving or treating AIs as persons, even though they have no bodies. And different countries can go different ways. So, you know, arguments about human rights today between, say, United States and China, think what it means in 50 years when you perhaps have billions of entities which are considered persons with rights in one country, but another country doesn't recognize them as persons at all because they have no biological body. And at least in the US, interestingly enough, there is already a completely open legal path to recognizing non-humans devoid of bodies as legal persons with rights. Because corporations, according to US law, are legal persons that has, for instance, freedom of speech, according to the Supreme Court since at least 2010. Now, at present, this is a legal fiction, because all the decisions of corporations are made by human beings with biological bodies. So Google, according to US law, is a legal person, but at present, all the decisions of Google have to be made by some human being. But what happens, in a few years maybe, when you start incorporating AIs as legal persons? You can technically incorporate an AI as a corporation, let's call it Google. And the interesting thing about Google is that it doesn't need any human employees to make its decisions for it. This is what the AI can do it by itself. So the AI, for instance, can open a bank account and can start earning money. It can go on TaskRabbit or Mechanical Turk online and offer its services to people or corporations and earn money, and then it has money. And then it can start investing its money in the stock exchange. And if it's a very intelligent AI, it could potentially become the richest person in the US. So think about a situation when the richest person in the US is not a human being. It's an AI. And again, according to US law, as far as I understand, one of the rights reserved for this non-human person is freedom of speech, which manifests itself, among other things, in making political contributions. So this AI could donate billions of dollars to politicians in exchange for giving even more rights to AI. So these are the kinds of science fiction scenarios I think that we should be more concerned with than the Great Robot Rebellion.
If a senior AI bot starts to hit on a junior AI bot in this corporation, what should the AI HR department... Okay. We have a bunch of flesh and blood bodies here. who have to go get pizza and beer. So I'm going to ask just one more question about the apocalypse, and then we're going to go to audience questions. So I was reading your book on the subway. I was wrapping it up before dinner the other night with my son, and this was my favorite paragraph. I'm just going to read it to you, and I want you to explain what it means. We have now created a non-conscious, but very powerful alien intelligence. Agreed. If we mishandle it, AI might extinguish not only the human dominion on Earth, but the light of consciousness itself, turning the universe into a realm of utter darkness. Very cheerful book here, Yuval. This is the end. It is our responsibility to prevent this. So one way to prevent it would be to prevent AI from extinguishing us. Another would be to try to create consciousness and send it out into the universe. Explain to me, the question that this paragraph raises is, what is the thing that humans could do that would allow consciousness to exist even if we extinguish ourselves?
Oh, I'm not sure what it is. I mean, the problem is we still don't understand consciousness. We don't know how it emerges in us. We don't know how it evolved. That's why we also, with regard to AI, this big question of AI consciousness, I tend to be agnostic about it. I don't think that AIs will necessarily develop consciousness, but I'm not sure that they will never develop consciousness. That could be. So again, this scenario that AIs destroy human civilization, take over, and maybe spread from Earth to the rest of the galaxy and to other galaxies, but in the process they never develop consciousness. This is the dark universe scenario. That, again, that there is huge confusion about these two terms because in humans they go together. Intelligence is the ability to attain goals and solve problems on the way to that goal. Consciousness is the ability to feel things like pain and pleasure and love and hate. Humans solve problems relying on our feelings. In us and in other mammals and animals, consciousness and intelligence go together. This is why we confuse them. Now, in computers, so far, we've only seen an advance, a huge advance in intelligence, without any advance in consciousness as far as we can tell. In some fields, narrow fields, AI is already far more intelligent than us, and still it has no consciousness. When it wins the game of chess, it's not happy. When it loses, it's not sad. It doesn't feel anything. Now, in many scenarios, as AI becomes more and more intelligent, at some point, it also gains consciousness. But there is no reason to think that this is inevitable. There could be different roads leading to super intelligence. Mammals and humans have been traveling along one road for millions and millions of years, a road which involves the development of consciousness. Computers, AIs, might simply be traveling along a different road, a much faster road, which reaches superintelligence without passing through any phase of developing consciousness. And if this happens, and if it gets out of our control, this could spell, again, not just the end of the human dominion on Earth, but the end of the light of consciousness itself. You can have a galactic empire without any feeling, and nothing feels anything. It's just all dark.
But why is that? Explain to me why that is so much a worse outcome than just the obliteration of humans, which is a plenty bad outcome.
There are other entities, conscious entities in the world right now. There are other animals. There is no reason to think that, in the history of billions of years of life, that sapiens is definitely the last station. Whether through biological evolution or whether through some kind of combination with AI, it's very likely that if we survive, I don't think that humans like us will still be here in 1,000 years or 10,000 years. The technology will be so advanced that there will be sentient beings, but they will have completely different bodies and minds, completely different experiences. And this is not necessarily bad. The same way that, the fact that we are here and the first human species that existed 2 million years ago are gone, we don't think about it as a tragedy. And most people, at least with regard to their children, they hope that their children will be, at least in some way, a bit more evolved than them. But to think that this will be completely wiped out, that there will still be intelligence, but no consciousness at all. I mean, I think that intelligence is really overrated. The really important thing in life is consciousness. It's not intelligence. I mean, intelligence enables us to do different things, but ultimately, it's all about consciousness.
You know who's still going to be there, Yuval? These guys.
The
Pigeons are going to be there, and they're going to speak thousands of languages. All right, let's go to some audience questions. In your last book, this is from Martin Gallardo, in Homo Deus, you began your book by arguing that humanity has, quote, has almost defeated, quote, hunger, plagues, and war. Do you still stand for that idea, or have you reconsidered your argument?
I think humanity has the capacity to rein in famine, plague, and war, but it depends whether we actually do it, depends on our decisions, and we have been making some terrible decisions over the last 10 years, which is why we are seeing the return of these calamities, of these conditions. We are now on the verge of a third world war, which, if it happens, is also likely to be accompanied by famine and potentially by plague. And the key thing to understand is that the decline, for instance, of war in recent generations was not the result of a change in the laws of nature. It was not some divine miracle. It was simply humans making good decisions and building good institutions. And if we start making bad decisions and neglecting the institutions that preserved peace, then war returns.
This question is from Hamad Alavi. There is growing concern regarding the impact of AI on employment, particularly for low-skilled jobs and low-income communities. Considering the rapid advancements and uncertainties associated with AI, what strategies or measures can be implemented to alleviate these negative effects?
The safest thing is to slow down. I think that humans and human societies are extremely adaptable, but in order to adapt, you need time. So, if 10% or 20% of people suddenly lose their jobs, this is a huge political crisis. If it's kind of more drawn out over several years, we have time to adapt. And the most important thing is what happens on the global level. Because when I look at the country like the United States, for instance, I'm not so worried. I mean, many jobs will disappear in the coming decade or two. Other jobs will emerge. The big question is whether people will be able to retrain themselves to fill the new jobs. And for that, they will need support. And the countries that lead the AI revolution, they will have immense resources to support the retraining of the population and also to support those members of society that will not be able to go through the transition. The big problem will be in other countries that might face complete economic collapse and will just not have the resources to retrain their workforce and to adapt to the new AI economy.
What do you think of the premise of the question that AI will affect employment, particularly for low-skilled jobs in low-income communities? People argue both sides of that.
I'm not sure. There are good reasons to think it will definitely impact also kind of high-income jobs, accountants, lawyers, doctors, coders, engineers. There is no reason to think that it will focus specifically on low-income jobs.
I think it's probably going to wipe out media CEOs and historians first. This is from Mike Sexton. My favorite thing about your historical writing is that it has implications not just for how we live, but how we should live. If you were a lifestyle guru instead, what message or recommendations would you have for your audience?
I'm not a lifestyle guru, so I don't know.
As most of you know, this man meditates 2 hours a day, takes a month-long retreat. You are a lifestyle guru.
Yeah, but I don't tell all people to do it. I know that, it works for me, but I know it doesn't work for other people. For somebody else, it's better to, take a hike in the woods, so do that instead. The idea that, meditation works for me, so it must work for all people, it's not.
Yeah, I tried a month-long silent retreat and didn't work for my employees and my 3 kids. How do you think AI and disinformation will impact minority rights, especially for those in the LGBTQ plus community?
Again, it depends on our decisions. It's not deterministic. It can work both ways. For my own life, I know that the internet and social media has been wonderful in many ways to the LGBTQ community. I met my husband 22 years ago in one of the first social media websites for gay people in Israel, which was, again, it was really a revolution, because if you think about minorities in history, there are 2 types of minorities. You have concentrated minorities and you have dispersed minorities. And concentrated minorities, you think like Jewish communities. So if you're born a Jew, let's say in Europe in the Middle Ages, then there aren't many Jews around, but you're surrounded by them. You're born into a Jewish family, in a Jewish neighborhood, in a Jewish ghetto, in a Jewish community, you know lots of Jews. So you have no problem finding other Jews. But for instance, I was born in Israel in the 1970s. I grew up in the 80s and 90s in a very homophobic society. And I wasn't born in Tel Aviv. I was born in a small suburb of Haifa. And I didn't know anybody who was gay. And this is a dispersed minority. Most gay boys are not born to a gay family in a gay community. Sometimes it happens, but it's very rare. So the first question you encounter is, how do I find the others? Again, a question that Jews don't have to deal with, but gay people had to deal with throughout history. And then the internet came along, and to a large extent solved the problem. That suddenly it became very easy, or at least much easier than before, to find each other. So, I often criticize, and in the book there is a lot of criticism of information technology and social media, but they also have enormous positive potential.
Could extinguish the light of the universe, but good for the gays. All right. Thank you. If you could resurrect one other species of human that is now extinct, which one would you bring back and for what purpose?
I think it will be very bad for them. I mean, the way that our species treat ourselves, just because we have a little bit of different language or skin color, I wouldn't like to be a Neanderthal minority or Denisova minority in a sapiens world.
Should AI be raised with human parents along a curated, this is from Kathleen Landers, along a curated developmental trajectory to create a sense of love and attachment and connection on the assumption that it's possible to instill a moral code in the way one is created by humans? We should try.
AIs are not organic. I mean, they function along a completely different, in completely different ways. They are not, I don't know, chimpanzees or Neanderthals that you can think, okay, I'll raise a chimpanzee in a human family so it will become human-like. And this is a key kind of misconception we often have about AI. Like you have all these people asking, when will AI reach human-level intelligence? The answer is never. It's not on the path to human-level intelligence. It's not human, it's not even organic. I mean, for me, the acronym AI traditionally stood for artificial intelligence. I think it should stand for alien intelligence. Alien not in the sense of coming from outer space, alien in the sense that, yes, this is intelligence, but it makes decisions, it processes information, it invents ideas in a fundamentally alien way. Again, it's not organic. One thing, just one very important thing is that organic beings, we work by cycles. Day and night, winter and summer, growth and decay, and sometimes we're active, sometimes we need to rest. One of the problems we encounter more and more in the world is that now the world is increasingly run by these non-organic intelligences that never need to rest. and they don't have cycles. And they pressure us to be the same. Instead of them becoming like us, they pressure us to be the same. And if you force an organic being to be on all the time, to be active all the time, eventually it just collapses and dies. You know, you think even about something like the financial system. So traditionally, the financial system is an organic system which sometimes take breaks. Wall Street the market is open only, I think, Monday to Friday, 9:30 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, that's it. Weekend, it's off. Christmas, it's off. And this is good for human beings. But if you give AIs greater control of finance, then the system is always on, and this puts pressure on human financiers and bankers to be always on, which is just humanly impossible. And the same thing is happening to journalists, and the same thing is happening to politicians, which consequently collapse. And I often say that the most misunderstood word in the English language, at least in the United States, is the word excited. That people overuse it as a good thing. Like they meet you and they say, oh, I'm so excited to meet you. You publish a book, oh, it is so exciting. And they think that excited means happy, but it doesn't. Excited means that like your nervous system and your brain is fully on. And if you could keep the nervous system of an organic entity on all the time, it leads to collapse. So the whole system is far too excited. We need to relax. Like we meet each other, I'm so relaxed to be here with you today. And not excited at all. And just think how good it would be if politics was less exciting. Like, what we need, I think above all in politics, is boring politicians. Like I would say, vote for boring politicians.
All right, well, I am so relaxed to ask the very last question of the night, Yuval. This is from Misha. Do you think that future reliance on artificial intelligence will impact and compete with religion as a source of spirituality?
Could be, quite likely. I think that, many religions have always fantasized about having access to a superhuman intelligence. And suddenly we have it. Think about texts, about holy texts. The idea of the holy text is that this is coming from a non-human intelligence which is superior to us. Now, the problem with holy texts throughout human history until today was that they couldn't really talk back to us. Like, there was something in the text we couldn't understand, and the text could not explain itself. Like, what is the correct interpretation of this passage in Scripture? So you always, even though in theory, the highest authority in the religion was the holy text, in practice, a human institution grew around the holy text. And the real authority was in the hands of the people who interpreted the text. And the same way that you have today this fight in the tech world between people who believe in open source and people who believe that no, it should be closed and just a couple of experts will. This was the same with Catholics and Protestants. Like the Catholics say, no, you have the experts of the church, they should interpret the Holy Code. And you have the Protestants who believe in open source. Anybody can read the code and interpret it by themselves. But what happens when for the first time in history the text can talk back? Whether the text of the traditional holy books, you can train an AI to read every single treatise written by every theologian or bishop or thinker in the 3rd century or in 11th century Byzantium, and that AI will understand the texts of Christianity better than any human being. Would it be more authoritative than human theologians and bishops? One big question. The other question, what happens if you have new religions with texts written by a non-human intelligence? And this can already happening right now. With AIs maybe disseminating a new holy text online, which creates the kernel for the next big religion, which will have, again, a text that can talk back, coming from a superhuman, non-human intelligence. So I definitely think that some of the most interesting developments in AI will be in the field of theology and religion. And maybe it's and with a recommendation that Google and Microsoft, they should hire a few theologians because they will need it.
All right, that is the perfect note to end on. Thank you so much to Politics and Prose. Thank you so much to the theater. And thank you most of all to Yuval Noah Harari.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, welcome. Thank you all for coming. My name is Alex Gardells. I am the director of Studio B. Tonight we have a wonderful program for you. And I'm going to hand it off to my lovely colleague, Natalia Ramos, to give a slight introduction.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So at the Berggruen Institute, we like to say that nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come. But we also believe that in order to have real impact, that idea needs a story. And so that's why we started Studio B, to bring together the thinkers, the scientists, the philosophers, the technologists, with the greatest storytellers of our time. Because at this moment of planetary scale transformation, getting the story right is more important than ever. So thank you all for being here, and I'm now going to pass it over to our founder, Nicholas.
Okay. Good evening. I'm Nicholas Berggruen, Berggruen Institute. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you, Natalia. Thank you, Alec. Thank you, Studio B. Thank you, everyone at the Berggruen Institute. And most importantly, thank you, Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Yuval Harari. Frankly, they don't need an introduction. I think you know who Joseph is. He is, in some ways, one of yours, meaning he is LA, Hollywood. He is he's behind and in front of the camera, and he's been engaged intellectually on the issues that we care about at the Institute. One of those issues is who are we becoming? Who do we want to be, humans, in an age where we can, in theory, change our own nature, transform ourselves through gene editing, AI, quantum computing. And no one has maybe put this into perspective like Yuval Harari. And Yuval wrote a new book, Nexus, which is powerful and, frankly, incredibly timely, because his vision, I think, has been that we've created our lives, our civilizations, from narratives. And we humans have really driven those narratives. But now with AI, it could be that the narrative is driven beyond us, even though in theory it came from us. So we could lose control if we ever had it, but we could really lose the narrative that we are potentially unleashing. So let's hear about it tonight, and thank you again.
Hey everybody, what's going on?
It's missing endangered adult. It's an endangered adult. AI. Endangered adults. AI.
Did that feel like a movie moment or what? Is that? Jesus. All right. I'm really, really excited to be here. Thank you to Nicholas and everyone at the Gruen Institute, Studio B. I am an enormous fan of this man's writing here, Mr. Yuval Harari. Ladies and gentlemen, can we hear it for him? He's written a new book called Nexus. I want to talk to you about that tonight, of course. Now, you're on a book tour. I'm sure you're talking about this book a lot and maybe saying some of the same things over and over again. I've never experienced that before myself, having to say the same things over and over again, promoting a piece of media. Watch Killer Heat, released on Amazon today. Prime Video. So I'm going to try to come at this conversation and let you say some of the things you want to say to everybody, but also maybe come at it from a perspective that's unique to this time and place. We're here in Los Angeles, which is sort of the epicenter of the film and television industry. I've worked in film and television my entire life. And a lot of your book is about storytelling. I love to consider myself a storyteller. As an actor and a filmmaker, it's something that I think of as more than a job. I connect to it on maybe an existential level, on who I am. And one thing I often like to say even is that storytelling is a big part of what makes humans human. So one of the first things I wanted to ask you, you wrote a book about humans called Sapiens. How many people have read Sapiens here? Yeah. So as an expert on the history and the prehistory of what humans are, I'm curious to hear what you think of that statement. If I say storytelling is a big part of what makes humans human, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yes.
this is this is the source of our power. We control the world because we can cooperate in much larger numbers than any other animal. And the secret of cooperation of humans is stories. I mean, you can't get to know more than 100 or 200 individuals, but the same story can be known to millions and even billions of people. And as long as everybody believes the same story, they can cooperate. They can agree on norms and values and so forth. And maybe to just throw just give one or two examples. If you think about the most famous face in history, the most famous portrait in history. So this is the face of Jesus. That over 2,000 years, more portraits of Jesus have been created than probably of any other person in history. And they are everywhere. In churches, in cathedrals, in houses, in schools, in government ministries, at least in some countries. And 100% of these portraits are fictional. Not a single one is authentic because nobody has any idea how Jesus actually looked like. There is not a single portrait or statue made during his lifetime that has survived. The earliest portrait we have is from about 200 years after his death, and it shows a man crucified on a cross with the head of a donkey because it was a graffiti drawn by anti-Christians who made fun of this new strange cult. In the Bible itself, there is not a single word about how the man looked like. There is one description of his clothes, but nothing about him, whether he was tall or short or thin or fat or black hair or bald or blonde, nothing. Everything is just fictions. And yet, these fictions have enabled billions of people to work together, whether for good purposes, like charities and building hospitals and whatever, or whether for fighting holy wars and launching inquisitions. But it all runs on stories.
And religion is an easy example, but perhaps the most important or successful example is money.
You're saying that money is a story.
It's just like, what else can it be? I mean, it has no objective value. You can't eat or drink dollars. The most successful storytellers in the world are not the people who win the Nobel Prize in literature. It's the people who win the Nobel Prize in economics. And one last thought, if you think about the United States today, maybe the last story that still holds this place together is the dollar. It's the only thing that Republicans and Democrats can still agree on is the value of a dollar. Everything else is like they have very different views.
So this gets at one of the things I found fascinating in the book, that you define stories not only by the content of that story, but the network of people that are connected by that story. You mentioned Republicans and Democrats, you mentioned Christians. Every story, especially any story of any popularity, it defines a certain network. Can you say more? Because that was a new concept to me.
Again, I mean, the way that Nexus tries to understand history is not the history of religions, cultures, wars, kings, but how information flows in the world and the networks of information that create the world. So to give one example, we tend to think about democracy and dictatorship as two contrasting types of ethical systems, of political systems. They have different ideals, different values, and which is true, but you can, on a more fundamental level, you can look at them as different information networks. Information simply flows differently in a dictatorship and in a democracy. A dictatorship is a network in which all the information flows to one hub, where all the decisions are being made. Whereas democracy is a system in which information, if dictatorship is a centralized information system, democracy is a distributed or decentralized system. Well, yes, some information flows to the center, let's say to Washington, where some decisions are being made, but most decisions are made elsewhere. Like if you look at the United States over the last century, so a lot of extremely important decisions were made here in Hollywood. And the influence of the people in Washington on what's happening in Hollywood, it's an open debate. Who influenced more whom? Was it Washington influencing Hollywood or vice versa? In the Soviet Union, there is no debate. I mean, the people in the center tell, Stalin is telling Eisenstein what to film. There is no debate. You do the wrong thing, you go to the gulag. Even if you do the right thing, you might go to the gulag. So that's the difference in how information flows between democracies and dictatorships, and I guess we'll get to that, but one of the biggest questions about AI is what will it do to these contrasting types of information flows, because in the 20th century, the US defeated the USSR ultimately because centralized information processing was inefficient. When all information about everything, economics, culture, the film industry, producing cars, all the information flowed to Moscow, and there are some bureaucrats needed to make decisions, they couldn't do it. They were overwhelmed by the amount of information and either made no decisions or bad decisions. Whereas the distributed system of the United States, it functioned much more efficiently. But what happens if you replace humans with AIs? Humans are overwhelmed by too much information. AIs become more efficient when you flood them with information. Again, it's an open debate. We still don't know the answer, but there is at least one school of thought that argues that AI will make centralized information systems more efficient, and the main problem of totalitarian and centralized system in the 20th century will become their big advantage, which we even see to some extent in the economic realm, that these huge high-tech monopolies that just monopolize entire sections of the economy, because size matters when you have this kind of technology.
Yeah. I want to get to AI. This is something I'm deeply fascinated with. I know a lot of you are too. I also want to get to what you just said about whether Hollywood or Washington is making more decisions, because we love to think that we're important here in Hollywood.
You are.
Before we do, I just want to cover one of the pieces of vocabulary that I found the most useful in your book that I want to go back to a few times as we talk tonight. And again, I think this is sort of empowering and flattering if you're a storyteller. You say in the book that stories can even create a new level of reality. And you talk about 3 different versions of reality, if you will. Objective reality, subjective reality, and intersubjective reality. Can you explain what you mean by those terms?
Yeah, so objective reality is things that exist whether you believe in them or not, whether you know about them or not. If an asteroid from outer space is now coming towards us, about to hit Earth and destroy human civilization, it exists whether people know about it or not. And similarly, viruses killed people, billions of people, long before anybody knew viruses exist. It doesn't matter if you believe in them or not, they can kill you. This is objective reality. Then you have subjective reality, which is reality in the mind of a single person. It depends on the consciousness, on the awareness of a single person. So if you feel pain, nobody else in the world feels this pain. Your doctor, your family can tell you, oh, there is nothing wrong with you. But if you feel the pain, it's still there. This is subjective reality. Now, intersubjective reality, this is something that didn't exist for, as far as we know, for most of the history of the universe. There were only objective and subjective realities. That's it. And stories were important for the appearance in the last few tens of thousands of years, at least in our species, of a new type of reality, intersubjective reality. Things that exist in the interaction between many consciousnesses, between many minds, that they often exist on the level of story, and we already mentioned some of them. Money is maybe the most important type of intersubjective reality. It's not objective. A dollar has no objective value in the sense that you can eat it or drink it or make something out of it. If you're a billionaire and you fly in your private jet with, I don't know, $1 billion and you crash on a deserted island inhabited only by, I don't know, monkeys and rats and whatever, your dollars are worthless. You cannot buy anything from the monkeys. You cannot make them build a raft for you. You still have maybe the papers, or you can show them on your smartphone to the monkeys. Look, I have $1 billion in my bank account. Just build this raft or give me these bananas. I'll give you as much as you want. It won't help. They are simply unaware of the existence of this reality. Now, if you crash on a lonely island with a cargo of bananas, you can eat them. If you crash with a cargo of, I don't know, hammers, you can use them to try and build a raft. But the most worthless thing to crash on a lonely island with is money. There's nothing to do with it. But if you have other people there and they believe the same story as you, it works. But again, it's fragile. Intersubjective realities are fragile because people can lose faith in it. Again, it happens to gods, that some gods were once the most powerful intersubjective realities in the world, and now nobody believes in them, and they are gone. And the same thing happens to money. And it's, going back, say, to the dollar, it's now interesting to see what might happen if some people lose faith in this intersubjective reality and instead put their faith in another one, like the Bitcoin. So the same way that we had wars of religion in previous eras, now we might have, just imagine trying to run a society when different people just reject the money of the other group. No, ours is better.
So one of the most powerful tools to create an intersubjective reality in our time is film and television. And again, here we are in LA, lots of us work making film and television. I'm curious just to dive in a little bit. You don't talk about Hollywood, film, and TV too much in your book, but because we're here, I'm curious to just ask you about it. We're also, by the way, here at the house where the horse head scene was shot from The Godfather. Which, come on, yeah, The Godfather. I'm curious to hear from you, from a historical perspective, how did film and TV change storytelling compared to the technologies that existed before film and TV, do you think?
So film and TV are of course not alone. They are part of the package of modern information technology. And the changes were enormous. Again, going back to one salient example, if you think about the history of democracy, so for most of history, large-scale democracies were simply impossible. There was no way to create a large-scale democracy because democracy is a conversation. And you know, in a Stone Age tribe, you want to have a conversation between all tribe members. It's relatively easy. They can all come together and talk. But as human societies became bigger and bigger, it became more and more difficult to bring everybody together to the town square or to the same place to have a conversation. So we don't know of any large-scale democracy in ancient times. All the examples, like Athens or Rome, or city-states, or even smaller tribes and towns. We begin to see large-scale democracies only in the late modern era with the rise of modern information technologies. First, the newspaper, and then telegraph and radio and television and film, and finally the internet. This is when you begin to see large-scale democracies because you can use these technologies to create a conversation in real time between millions of people. People spread over entire continents and they all watch the same news on television, the same TV series, the same movie at the same time, so they can connect in a way that was just impossible before. And this was the foundation of modern large-scale democracy. And again, we'll get to that later, but the new information technologies of the present era, like social media and AI, they are destabilizing democracy for this reason, because democracy is built on top of information technology, so it's not hard to see why a major change in information technology will create an earthquake in the structure built on top of it, which is democracy. But the last thing I'll say is that every technology has many different usages. Also, modern totalitarian regimes are built on the same technology. There were no totalitarian regimes in the ancient world, large-scale totalitarian regimes. Totalitarian regimes are regimes that try to control everybody all the time, everything you do. In the ancient world, you have many monarchies and autocracies, but most of the time, you know, the emperor in Rome, he collects taxes and he directs the armies, but he doesn't try to manage the life of every individual in every village on a day-to-day basis, because this is simply impossible. You begin to see it at the same large-scale totalitarianism at the same time as large-scale democracy, because it relies on the same technology. I mean, the Soviets, for instance, I mean, at the same time that Hollywood is established,
right.
You also see the flowering of the Soviet film industry, and the Soviets were masters, at least in the beginning, of the art of filmmaking.
Eisenstein.
Yeah. And they use the same technology to create a totalitarian regime that everybody from, you know, the Pacific Ocean to the Baltic Sea would watch the same movies, and all the movies are giving the same narrative, the same messages directed from the center.
The Nazis were also brilliant filmmakers.
Exactly.
Leni Riefenstahl, and yeah. You were touching on it, but that's the next place I wanted to go is, okay, so if film and television changed the intersubjective realities and changed the way that networks can form, let's move to the dominant media technology for the last couple decades, because Sadly enough, that's not film and TV. Not that film and TV did such a great job, but the dominant technology now has been social media. So I'm curious to ask you the same question that I asked about film and TV. With the rise of social media, how did that change what networks could form, what intersubjective realities could be created, and how humans behaved and thought?
Well, it had immense impact. I mean, just think about the numbers. You have billions of people spending hours every day on this. It is bound to have a tremendous impact. And it creates new ways to form networks, to organize people, which again has a profound impact on society. And it had positive influence and also negative influence. I'll talk a little about the positive influence. I tend to talk a lot about the negativities, but maybe start with the positive influence of social media. The example I like best is from my own personal life. I met my husband, Itzik, 22 years ago in one of the first social media websites for gay people in Israel. And the thing about, for instance, social media in the gay community is that over history you have two types of minorities. You have, again, in terms of information networks, you have concentrated minorities and you have dispersed minorities. So Jews, for instance, are a concentrated minority. Even if they say in a particular country of just 1% of the population, they are concentrated in particular communities, neighborhoods. So usually a Jewish boy would be born into a Jewish family in a Jewish neighborhood. So finding other Jews isn't a problem. You're surrounded by them, even though you're just 1% of the population.
As a native Angelino, I can confirm that this is true.
But a gay boy is usually not born into a gay family in a gay neighborhood. And being born gay in Israel in the 1970s and growing up in the 1980s and 1990s in what was a very homophobic society, like the first issue is, how do you find anybody else? I mean, I didn't know anybody who was out, certainly not in my town. I saw, again, this goes back to film and television, like the first time I saw gay people was on the screen.
What show was it, or movie, do you remember?
There was this British series, Are You Being Served? With, what's his name?
I don't know it. Wow.
Really?
Okay, yeah, no.
Mr. Humphreys. So, there was one film that I saw later in the 90s, Lilies, by a Canadian director, I think.
What's it called?
Lilies.
Lilies.
It wasn't very famous, but he had a tremendous impact on my life.
Great, yeah.
Like, I remember going to see this movie and coming out of the movie theater and telling myself, you're gay.
Wow.
This was really, it had a huge impact on my life. But you know, you see a gay person on television, you can't reach out to them. And you don't know who else in my town now sees the same movie or the same series and feels the same as me. It's only one directional. But then social media, the internet came, and social media came, and you can interact suddenly through the screen. So what was kind of maybe the biggest hurdle ever? How do you find the others? Suddenly becomes very, very easy.
All right, that's the positive side.
That's the positive side.
But
there are also negativities. I mean, as you may have noticed, we now have the most sophisticated information technology in history, and we can't talk to each other anymore. And certainly we can't listen to each other. I said earlier that democracy is a conversation, and the conversation is breaking down all over the world. I mean, every country has its own special explanations why Republicans and Democrats can't hold a reasoned conversation anymore. And you have all these explanations about American history and society and whatever. But then you go to Brazil, it's the same thing. You go to Israel, it's the same thing. I even was in Canada 2 weeks ago. I thought this was the same place. They told me, no, it's the same in Canada. And what's happening? And it's not like the ideological divides today are much worse than they were, let's say, in the 60s. the ideological divides in the 60s were actually much, much bigger. The issues like the civil rights movement, the sexual revolution, the Vietnam War, the Cold War, even the violence, at least up till now, was much worse in terms of assassinations and riots and so forth. But nevertheless, people could still hold a conversation, agree on some basic facts like who won the last elections, and have bipartisan laws. So why is it breaking down all over the world? And the best answer so far that we know about is social media. Again, this basic information technology underlying the whole structure, it's now creating an earthquake. And the mechanism by now is quite well understood. I mean, 10 years ago, it was not well understood, unfortunately. Now we know what's wrong. We still fail to fix it, but at least we know what's wrong. And this is very important because this is kind of the first major impact of AI on history. Because social media is managed not by human beings, it's managed by algorithms, AIs. And again, this is very interesting because one of the first jobs which was automated was not taxi drivers, and it was not textile workers, it was media editors, news editors. You know, in the 19th and 20th century, being an editor of a major media or news organization was an immensely powerful position. You shaped the conversation. You decided what people would be talking about. Some of the most powerful figures in modern history, they began as editors. Lenin's only job before he became Soviet dictator was editor of the newspaper Iskra.
I did not know that. That's funny.
Benito Mussolini was a journalist. Then he was editor of Avanti, I think was the name of the newspaper. And then he was promoted from editor of Avanti to dictator of Italy.
Mussolini and Lenin both?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's fascinating.
You know, if you look at the French Revolution, Jean-Paul Marat shaped the French Revolution by editing the major newspaper of Paris in those days, L'Ami des Peuples, the friend of the people. And now this job has been given to algorithms. Who is the editor of the Facebook newsfeed? Who is the editor of TikTok? Who is the editor of Twitter? An algorithm, a non-human intelligence. And these AIs, these algorithms, they were given by their human masters a seemingly benign task, goal: increase user engagement. Engagement, sounds good to be engaged, no? And the reason was obvious. I mean, business model. The more time people are engaged on TikTok or Facebook or Twitter, the more time they spend on the platform, the more they share and so forth, the more advertisements you can show them, and the more data you can collect about them and sell it to a third party or use it to produce even more powerful algorithms and AIs. So the business model of most social media try to keep people glued to the screen as much as possible. And this was the task given to the editors of these places. Increase user engagement. And the algorithms experimented on millions, actually billions of human guinea pigs, and they made a discovery, which was actually also made by philosophers and politicians thousands of years ago, but now the AIs discovered it also, that the easiest way to increase user engagement is outrage, or greed, or fear, or hate. If you press the greed button, or the hate button, or the fear button in a human's mind, you grab their attention. You get them glued to the screen. And this is what they did. They flooded the information market with more and more outrage and greed and fear, with fake news and conspiracy theories, and the conversation broke down. And this was very, very primitive AIs. This was like, you know, long before ChatGPT, which is also quite primitive compared to what's coming. But even this, when people talk about, you know, this kind of future fears about AIs, it's not in the future, it's already in the past.
If you look at the impact of these very primitive AIs on democracies all over the world, on societies all over the world, it's not too early to worry about the impact of AI. It's too late in many ways.
One thing I would just compliment what you're saying with is that it is true that the algorithms, as you put it, sort of discovered that the best way to maximize engagement was outrage, fear, extremism, etc. What's harder to describe with language is the algorithm doesn't know that exactly. I don't think.
No, they are not conscious, not at all.
The algorithm is not like a person saying, there's greed, there's hate, I know, I'll put more hate and greed in the feed. It's not like that. It's just a cold and dumb pattern matching calculation.
It's cold and smart. No.
Okay, fair enough. Well, that's a fair segue. Cold and dumb to cold and smart. We've talked about film and TV. Now we've talked about social media. Now I want to talk about what's coming next. We all, I think, are kind of aware we're at the very beginning of some very big changes that are coming fast and furious our way because of the rapidly emerging technology known as AI. I want to, through the same, your book, you say so many different things about AI, and I want to just narrow it down to, again, because we're kind of coming at this conversation through the lens of storytelling, to start there. How do you think AI will change storytelling from what it used to be?
Well, as we said earlier, stories are some of the most powerful technologies in history. Whether it's the story of Jesus or whether it's the story of money, this is really the foundation of human civilization, is stories. Everything else is built on top of it. And for tens of thousands of years, the only entities on this planet that could create stories, either create new stories or elaborate and interpret old stories, were human beings. Only the human mind was capable of doing it. And now we have on this planet another entity which is capable of spreading and interpreting and ultimately creating stories. It's not conscious, at least not yet, at least as far as we know. At least my position is you don't need consciousness to do these things. You need intelligence. Intelligence and consciousness are different things. Intelligence is the ability to attain goals, to solve problems. Consciousness is the ability to feel things, pain and pleasure, love and hate. We tend to confuse them because in humans and also in other mammals and animals, consciousness and intelligence go together. We solve problems through our feelings. But AI and computers, they are very different. As far as we know, they have no consciousness, they don't feel anything, but they are highly intelligent, at least in some fields. And again, if you think about storytelling, so now the ability of AIs to compose stories, to write texts and create images and create music is really astounding. You know, people say, yes, it's still not as good as the best humans, but it's already better than many humans, or people would say than the average human even. And it's only the beginning, it's nothing, it's just 10 years since the AI revolution began. We haven't seen anything yet. And when I read, for instance, a story composed by AI, what strikes me the most, you can say, oh, it's not good because of this or that, it lacks this, but it's really a story. It's held together by some coherent ideas, motifs. It's not just some kind of glorified autocomplete that it just strings words together randomly, or it takes bits and pieces of sentences from here and there and put them together. No, there is actually a logic to the story. So even if it's not as good as the best human storytellers in 2024, what will it be in 2034 or 44? And again, stories are not just mythological stories, or poems, or theater plays, or movies. Money is also a story. So these things are going to create new financial devices also. Finance is one of the most creative things of all. If you think about human creativity, so think money, checks, ETFs, CDOs, all these things extremely creative. And they are increasingly we are going to see new financial devices created by a non-human intelligence. And for tens of thousands of years, we lived cocooned inside a human culture. Like our lives are shaped by all these stories and artifacts that other humans created. Again, from the holy books, the Bible and the Quran and the Vedas, to the songs and the music and the theater and the movies and the artifacts, the chair, the shoes, everything. This cultural cocoon made by humans. What does it mean? Before we get to the question, is it good, is it bad, is it dangerous? Just leave aside for a moment the judgment. Just think about what would it mean for human beings to live inside a world woven to a large extent by an alien intelligence. Alien not in the sense that it's coming from outer space. Alien in the sense that it creates in a very different way than the human mind. And this, I think, is the biggest question that we are facing, certainly in Hollywood, kind of the center, the epicenter of human storytelling, but all over the world.
So here is probably the only thing in the book that I don't think I agree with exactly.
That's
and so,
good.
Yeah, so I would love to hash this out with you a bit.
Yeah.
Describing AI as alien intelligence. Clearly, you're not talking about an alien from outer space. I understand, but you also in the book even do use the word God. You say perhaps this is. These are entities that could be seen as some kind of new gods. Mm-hmm. So I tend to feel like describing this technology in terms like alien, God, the personification or the deification of these computer systems, I'm worried that that story could do more harm than good. And I have some reasons why, but before I get to them, I would just want to start by asking, so you very decisively decided in your book to describe this technology in these terms, alien, God. Tell me about your thought process. Why did you decide to describe the technology in those terms?
I mean, it's basically a PR strategy. How do you present it to the public? And yes, I mean, it demands a lot of thought. Is it a good PR strategy or not in terms of the results? And one reason I chose to go in the alien direction is because I see too much of the discussion gets bogged down in the idea that AI is trying to reach human-level intelligence. Mm-hmm. And that the very definition, what is AI? It's the moment when computers are somehow equivalent to humans. Mm-hmm. And I think this is completely misleading.
I very much agree with that.
That AI is not progressing towards human-level intelligence, just as airplanes are not trying to reach bird-level flight.
Yeah.
They are just doing their own thing, which is completely different from birds. And that's also what I think about computers and AIs. They are doing their own intelligent thing, which is completely different from the human intelligence. And this is one reason that I chose the kind of term alien to describe it.
I think that's a great reason. I also find it counterproductive when AI is described in these kinds of terms. Is it approaching human level intelligence? They throw around this term AGI, artificial general intelligence, and they define it quickly as once it approaches human level intelligence. I agree, I don't think that's helpful either. I'll tell you one of the reasons why I am concerned with describing this technology and sort of personifying it or deifying it. And that is a little bit about how the tech actually works and is built. I'm obviously not an engineer, but I've learned enough about this. The way that these models are built is they take enormous sets of data. They input that data into an algorithm, a sort of a black box that they frankly don't even totally understand, and it spits out outputs of value. Now, where did all that data come from that was input into the model? It came from humans. Humans generated that data. So my concern about describing it as alien or godlike is it feels distinct from, separate from humans. It feels like it helps to hide the reality of how these models really work. Because, by the way, I think a lot of these tech companies, maybe not all of them, CEO of Stability is in the house and they're working on, what are they called? Sanitized data sets, which I really appreciate, actually getting the licenses of the data sets that they're using to train these models. But I think a lot of these labs, they're not doing that. What they're doing is stealing a bunch of data from people who deserve the right to, I think, own the data that they created. And they're not disclosing what data went into these models. When they are asked, they won't say. They're getting sued left and right because of this. To me, this is a really central problem that we absolutely need to solve as soon as possible for a lot of reasons that I want to get into. One of those problems is economic. We in the film and television industry are going to feel it maybe first. But I don't think it's limited to Hollywood. I think so many industries, whether it's doctors or architects, designers, logistics operators, anybody who's working at a computer, and once there's robots, really anybody that's doing almost any work is going to have their livelihood threatened. And these tech companies are going to try to say, oh, well, we invented a god. It can just do your job. When in reality, what they did was they stole everybody's data, crunched up the numbers, and generated those outputs. Without the human-generated data, their products are 100% useless, have no value at all. And so one of my concerns with describing this technology in terms of gods or aliens or anything that sort of personifies it or turns it into a creature, a thing on its own that exists independently of the human input that made it, is that it helps these tech companies hide where their products really come from. And where they really came from is humans. Okay.
So I agree. I mean, I think that the main issue is whether we focus on the input or on the output. I completely agree with what you describe. I think about it that, AI is basically eating the whole of human culture that we've produced over tens of thousands of years, from the cave paintings of tens of thousands of years ago to the movies of today. We've produced this enormous amount of cultural artifacts and habits. And now AI comes and eats it within just a few months or years. And I think you're also absolutely correct that the business model of many of these companies is based on kind of this trick that convincing everybody that information works differently from everything else in the universe. And I think this goes back to Shoshana Zuboff's very insightful book, Surveillance Capitalism.
Yeah.
Where she explains that, for thousands of years, people had this basic principle, don't steal. And then the tech companies come and says, yes, don't steal, but it doesn't apply to information. That's different. That's a different realm that all these things about, no, it's not stealing. And again, the reaction should be, why is so different with information? And here I completely agree that, I'll think about it more, that using this kind of terminology of making it very alien is actually helping this way of presenting things. When I think about the kind of alien nature of the technology, I think mainly about the output. Because it ate all these kind of familiar things, but it then starts to create things which are different, at least in some ways, from everything that was put into it. And this idea that AI is just, glorified copy-paste, that it takes texts or images or music and just takes something from here and something from there and puts it together and, it's something new. And no, it's really more than that. I mean, to some extent, this is also what humans do. And I think about my line of work of writing books. So I do the same thing. I read all these previous books and articles, and I talk with people, and then I take something from here and something from there and put it together, and here is a new book. And it's the same with music. I mean, nobody starts from nothing. Everybody, every musician listens to previous works of art and adds something, but without the previous input, nobody could do it.
It's true. That is true. Finish your thought, but I want to respond to that.
So, and I think that it's crucial to understand what we are facing in the AI revolution, that my fear of humanizing it too much is that then the kind of underestimate the challenge. That we think, it can only cut and paste together our creations. It won't really be something completely new. No, it can create really, again, from finance to religions, it can create completely new things, which could be good, could be bad, but we will have to deal with living in a really radically different reality.
I do agree with that, and we shouldn't underestimate the challenge. One thing I wanted to respond to is, first of all, I agree with you that creativity is always an amalgamation of your influences. Shakespeare wasn't the first one to write Romeo and Juliet, and the Judy Garland Wizard of Oz is actually not the first Wizard of Oz, et cetera, et cetera. I'm a big fan. The creative community that I founded, Hit Record, was all about remix and people building on each other's work. And let's privilege honesty over originality, because we're all original human beings. But that's just it, I think. We're all original human beings. I think to apply that same way of thinking to a computer system is predicated on personifying the AI. And I think this is going to be a central question we confront as we go forward is, do we want to afford moral standing and legal standing to these computer systems? There are going to be people who argue we should, especially because very soon, a lot of folks are going to be in love with these computer systems. There's already lots of people who are spending hours and hours and hours a day talking to and interacting with their AI best friends, their AI lovers, etc. That's only going to get way more sophisticated.
Absolutely.
And I think those folks, and I'm not excluding myself. Who knows? I mean, I don't mean to other them. I think it's going to be very, very common. We're all going to get really emotionally attached to these AI characters that we interact with. And I think it's going to feel very natural to start talking about AI rights, comparing it to civil rights. And I'm quite concerned that if we go down that road, it could be very perilous. That affordance of those rights could go hand in hand with some of the worst dystopian outcomes that you describe in your book.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think one of the major things about AIs that we will see is that it will be able to create intimate relationships with human beings.
Yes.
I don't necessarily mean sexual. could be also sexual, but intimate
Oh, it'll be
relationships-
sexual. That's not all it'll be, but
Yeah, some. And it's very close. It's already beginning to happen. It will be a major issue in societies all over the world. Whether, we don't, philosophically, there is no way to prove that anyone is a conscious entity. And personhood and legal rights ultimately depend on whether an entity is conscious. Consciousness also is the capacity to suffer. And rights are linked to the capacity to suffer. So if you think about, animal rights, so the big issue is if they can suffer, so they can suffer pain or loneliness or distress, so maybe they don't deserve the same rights as humans, but there at least is an ethical debate to be there. Whereas there is no debate about the rights of chairs, like if I throw this chair into a fire, so again, it could be a crime against the human owner of the chair, but not against the chair, because the chair can't suffer. Now, we don't have any proof that anybody has consciousness, has this capacity to suffer. And we've known it for thousands of years. So granting rights is really a matter of social convention. That society agrees that all humans are conscious beings. And society agrees that dogs, because we have attachment to them, they should have rights, but cows and pigs shouldn't.
an intersubjective reality.
Exactly. And as humans become attached to AIs and develop relationships with them, it will be a major issue. And there'll be huge pressures to recognize them as persons. And maybe one also of even geopolitical divides in the world could be between countries that recognize AIs as persons with rights and countries that don't. And arguments today about different attitude to human rights would be dwarfed by this. And interestingly enough, if you think, what is the country which is closest to recognizing AIs as person? It's the United States. Because the legal path is wide open. In the US, it's one of the countries in the world where the legal path to recognizing AIs as person is open. And this is because corporations are recognized by US law as persons which even have rights like freedom of speech in Citizen United against, what was it, in 2010. Now, until today, the idea that corporations are persons with rights was a legal fiction because every decision of the corporation ultimately had to be made by some human executive or lawyer or accountant. Like Google is a legal person in the United States, but every decision of Google has to be made by a human being. Now, think what happens if you incorporate an AI. According to US law, today you don't need any new laws. All the laws are in the books already. According to US law, you can incorporate an AI and it's now a legal person with rights like freedom of speech. But unlike Google, this AI can actually make decisions, can actually take action in the world. So here I'll pitch a sci-fi movie for the people in the audience.
Great. That was what I wanted to get to next, so go.
So you have an AI incorporated, it's a legal person, it can open a bank account, it can earn money. It goes on one of these websites like TaskRabbit, where you can hire persons online to do jobs for you for money, and it earns money. And then it takes its money and invests it in the stock exchange, and it does very well because it's an AI, it's super intelligent. And finance is the easiest playground for AIs. Self-driving vehicles, this is hard because you have to deal with physical and social reality. So every year, Elon Musk and others promise next year everything is self-driving cars. It doesn't happen because it's difficult, it's messy. Finance is a purely informational and mathematical world. It's just data. It's the perfect playground for AI. So this AI goes takes its money, invests it, and becomes the richest person in the US. The richest person in the US is not a human being. It's an AI. And one of the things granted to AIs, according to this Supreme Court decision in Citizen United, under freedom of speech, is making political donations. So the AI starts to donate billions of dollars to politicians in exchange for, advancing AI rights. The legal path to that destination in the US is wide open.
I think there are probably some screenwriters here tonight who I hope are taking notes. I like that story. We're running out of time. I could talk to you all day. I'm so grateful to have had this conversation with you. I thought maybe you could leave us this, if you consider this a group of Hollywood storytellers in the old-fashioned world of film and television who are still clinging on to some amount of influence in this world. What would you have us do? What are the messages that you would have us try to spread with our stories?
Explain bureaucracy to people.
Explain bureaucracy. That does not sound like a good movie.
We do not have enough movies about bureaucracy. And that's a very, very big problem. Because human societies are based on bureaucratic systems, from hospitals to armies. And as you said, bureaucracies are not good material for stories. And this is because they are a very late development in evolution. I mean, all the basic plots of human stories, from theaters in ancient Greece to modern Hollywood, is really taken, you're stealing it from evolution. Like, think about how, the basic love triangle. Two males fighting over a female. Hyenas do it, and porcupines do it, and Hollywood does it. And it wasn't invented in Hollywood, this plot. It goes back tens of millions of years in evolution. Similarly, you think about sibling rivalry, like Succession. Siblings fighting, who does the father loves most? You have entire human peoples, nations, like the Jewish people. This is their story. Father loves us more than any of the other siblings. And again, this story wasn't invented in the Bible, in Cain and Abel. It's tens of millions of years goes back. Like, all the mammals and most of the birds and even some of the reptiles know this basic story of evolution, sibling rivalries. Brothers and sisters fighting for the love of their parents. And bureaucracy is not there. Because bureaucracy appeared only about 5,000 years ago in ancient Mesopotamia for the first time after the invention of writing. And we don't have any kind of evolutionary preparation for understanding bureaucratic systems. There are no love affairs between documents. There are no sibling rivalry. Hey, there are different laws fighting who does father love more. And therefore they are boring. They are not good for user engagement. But they are extremely important to really understand how human societies function. And this has been the big lacuna of art for thousands of years. That artists are extremely good in telling us all these mythological stories and romantic dramas, which are mostly taken from evolution. Very, very few good stories about bureaucracy. Here and there you can find Kafka or The Big Short or Yes, Prime Minister, to those who know the British series. There are some examples, but it's rare. When was the last time you saw a big Marvel blockbuster about an accountant that doesn't turn into Spider-Man or Superwoman or something? They are staying an accountant throughout the movie, and they fight the bad guys by flooding them with forms they have to fill in and discovering tax evasion and things like that. Not a lot of movies like that. But this is how human society functions. And linking it to AI, Hollywood did a really big service in alerting humans to the potential dangers of AI long before anybody else talked about AI. The Terminator and Matrix, but there was one big disservice that Hollywood did, which is it described the dangerous scenario in the wrong way. It was mostly about the big robot rebellion. The day the robots and computers decide to get rid of us and to rebel against us. and robots running in the street shooting people. And this is not likely to happen anytime soon. And because people saw it in the movies that this is the danger from AI, and it's not coming soon, the technology is just not there, so people feel complacent, including the people who developed the technology. Because the Terminator is nowhere, it's not in the neighborhood. But the danger is not the big robot rebellion. The danger will be millions and millions of AI bureaucrats making more and more decisions about us, from whether to give us a loan to whether to bomb our house. And to understand what we are facing, we will need a much better understanding of bureaucratic systems. And it's not, of course, it's not only AIs. We have other issues with not being able to understand bureaucracy well. Part of it is that sometimes the bureaucracy is really doing bad things and we can't understand it. But often it's the opposite, that modern societies cannot exist without these bureaucracies, but people are extremely suspicious of them and fall easy prey to conspiracy theories about the deep state and so forth, because they just don't understand how things like budgets function. And we need help from artists, from screenwriters, from movie makers. We saw enough movies about mythology and about superheroes and so forth. We really need help with understanding how bureaucracies function.
You can rise to the challenge. I know you can do it. We can do it. I want to end on one more question. Nexus, the book you wrote, has a fair amount of pessimism in it. And this conversation gives, I think, a lot of fair reasons to be pessimistic. Tell me about something that makes you optimistic.
That just as AI is nowhere near its full potential, so humans are also nowhere near our full potential. Basically, if for every dollar and every minute we invest in developing AI, we'll also develop $1 in a minute and a minute in developing ourselves, our minds, we will be okay. The problem is that, in many ways, too many people despair of the humans and put all their chips literally on the AIs. And, you talk to the people who lead the AI revolution, and they realize this is something very dangerous. And they realize that humans need just time to adapt. But they can't slow down. You go from one corporation to the next, and they tell you, we would like to slow down, but we can't, because we can't trust our competitors to slow down, whether the other corporations or whether the Chinese or somebody else on the other side of the ocean. So we are in this very, very strange situation that what is really driving the AI revolution is the inability of humans to trust each other. And here comes the most ironic or dangerous part of it. When you ask the same people, okay, you have to run faster because you can't trust the other humans, but would you be able to trust the AIs that you're developing? And they say yes. So the same people who can't trust the humans, they say they will be able to trust the AIs. And they have an explanation to some extent. They say, we have thousands of years of experience with humans. We know we can't trust them. We don't have an experience with AIs. Who knows? Maybe they could be trusted. And my perspective as a historian is the opposite. We have thousands of years of experience with humans, and during those thousands of years, we have managed to increase human trust tremendously. 10,000 years ago, people live in tiny bands. They can only trust the other 100 people in their band, and that's it. Very few mechanisms to trust strangers and foreigners. Over the years, we've built these large networks which are really based ultimately not just on information, but on trust.
Stories.
And the stories, the money, the bureaucracies, they helped us to gain trust between, you go on the street, every day you meet more strangers that people in the Stone Age met throughout their lives. And in 99% of the cases, it's okay. And you rely on these people for our food, for our healthcare, for our defense. So we have now reached a point when in some ways we trust billions of other people to provide us with our food and with our basic necessities. So it's not true that we have thousands of years of experience that humans are not to be trusted, just the opposite. And with AIs, we have no experience. So it's a very, very, very big gamble to despair of the humans and put all our trust in the AIs.
Well, on that note, I feel even more trust in you, Yuval, and all of you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the conversation. And have a good night.
We have no experience in history of a less intelligent species that manages to control a more intelligent species. Horses don't control us. Cows don't control us. We control them. What happens when we create a more intelligent species than us? These super intelligent AIs. So maybe in the short term, it will be good for our economic growth and prosperity. But what happens in 20, 30, 50 years when millions of super intelligent AIs run the world? They manage the financial system, the military system, the cultural system. How will humanity be able to coexist with a new super intelligent species? This is the big question.